The afternoon sun cast a faint glow over Washington, D.C. Karoline Leavitt, 27 years old, the youngest White House press secretary in history, was resting in her luxurious apartment near the White House, the small silver cross on the collar of her navy blue blazer, a mark of faith from New Hampshire, glimmered as she stood up. Suddenly her phone rang. President Trump was calling Karoline. There's a religious case at the D.C. local court. A group of Christians is suing because they were banned from praying in public. Go now observe report. His voice was urgent, leaving her no time to think. Karoline's tidy apartment reflected her disciplined documents, neatly stacked business attire prepared in advance. Today, she opted for a simpler style: blazer, white shirt, black pants, but still wore the cross as a habit as Trump's spokesperson. She was used to handling crises, but this was different. It touched her personal faith. Karoline quickly jumped into her sleek black SUV, speeding through. The crowded traffic NPR blared the news, but she turned it off, focusing on the unexpected task ahead before diving into the story comment, where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. Karoline Leavitt pushed through the glass doors of the D.C. local court, stepping into a stifling, chaotic space. The crowd's murmurs rang out like an off-key symphony, citizens awaiting minor cases, traffic violations, contract disputes mixed with the clacking of keyboards from the clerk's corner. She glanced at her watch, 2:53 p.m. Just a few minutes remained before the religious case hearing began, the one Trump wanted her to monitor closely. Karoline chose a hard wooden chair in the middle row, sat down her document bag, and opened her phone to take notes. Silver cross on her neck glimmered under the fluorescent lights, but she didn't notice the eyes around the room fixating on her. The courtroom wasn't large, but its clutter made it feel oppressive. A middle-aged man in a T-shirt printed with "I am" King sat a few seats away, fiddling with his phone to her right. A young woman wearing an oversized necklace shinier than a chandelier whispered to her lawyer. Karoline frowned. Clearly, dress code rules here weren't strict. She focused on her task, documenting details of the Christian group suing the government for banning public prayer in a local park. This was an ISS Trump wanted to turn into a symbol for conservatives, and she was his eyes here. The wooden door behind the judges' bench swung open, and Judge Charles Hargrove stepped out at 62. He carried a rigid demeanor, salt and pepper hair combed back, wire-rimmed glasses slipping down his nose, and a black robe pressed flat as if just ironed. The crowd fell silent. As he sat, his cold, sharp eyes scanning the room, "All rise," shouted James Wilson, a tall black BFF with a stern face. Karoline stood with the others, phone still in hand, her gaze studying Harrove. He banged his gavel on the desk, signaling the start of the session. "This is a court of law, not a place to show off personality," he declared, his voice deep but cutting like a knife. Hargrove began calling cases swiftly. A man fined for parking in the wrong spot. $50. No argument, a woman laid on. Rent, payments. A light warning. Karoline took notes, noticing Hargrove ran things like a machine, efficient but cold. She glanced at the man in the "I Am King" T-shirt. He stood to present a neighbor dispute, and Harrove didn't mention his flashy shirt. The woman with the oversized necklace was called up too. No word about her jewelry. Karoline frowned again. Something was off. Then Harrow's eyes landed on her. He stopped mid-sentence, his hand flipping through paper, stalling, his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses narrowing as if recognizing something. "Miss Leavitt," he said, his voice icy but with a hint of hesitation, clearly having recognized the familiar face from White House press briefings. Karoline looked up, unsurprised, standing. With natural composure, the crowd turned to look at her, murmurs rising as a few others recognized her too. That cross Hargrove pointed at her neck, his tone rigid. "It doesn't belong here. The courtroom is a neutral place, not somewhere to display faith." Karoline glanced around. No prohibitive sign hung on the walls. She replied, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Karoline Litt, White House press secretary, here to observe a case for work. This is a personal item protected by the First Amendment, violating no rules." Hargrove squinted his face. "Reading work. This isn't the place to wear that and cause trouble. The courtroom is neutral." Not a church. He banged his gavel again, as if to emphasize his authority. James Wilson. The bailiff stood near the bench, tilting his head to observe Mrs. Thompson. The middle-aged court clerk, with her hair in a tight bun, stopped typing, glancing at Karoline with curiosity. The man in the t-shirt and the woman with the oversized necklace whispered too, each other clearly surprised that Hargrove didn't notice them. Karoline stood still, gripping her phone tightly. She realized instantly Hargrove wasn't just targeting her, but the cross itself, a symbol he seemed to despise. "Sir, I have the right to wear it under the First Amendment," she said, her voice calm but firm. Hargrove cut her off immediately. "Don't lecture me on the law. Step up to the bench now." The crowd held its breath. Karoline took a deep breath, stepping up to the defendant. Stand her heels clicking lightly on the old wooden floor of the D.C. local court. The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on her. The silver cross on her navy blazer collar glimmered under the lights, like a small flame amid an approaching storm judge. Charles Hargrove sat elevated, his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, narrowing further, his face growing red with anger. "So what are you doing here with that thing, missile?" He asked, his voice low, but sharp, as a razor, clearly trying to maintain. "An air of authority, sir. I'm here on duty and have the right to wear it," she replied, still clutching her phone, her thumb discreetly switching on the recording mode. Hargrove banged his gavel on the desk, the sound echoing through the room. "I've seen plenty of people like you thinking faith gives them the right to disrupt anywhere. This is my courtroom, and I say it's not allowed." He leaned forward, gripping the gavel tightly. "Do you know this behavior is contempt of court?" Karoline furrowed, her brow quickly glancing around the room. The man in the "I Am King" t-shirt sat there unnoticed. The woman with the oversized necklace whispered to her lawyer. Ignored. "Yet her tiny cross was the problem, sir. I'm not disrupting anything," she replied, her voice still steady. "I'm here for work, and my attire doesn't affect anyone. If you have a specific ban, I'd like to see the written rule." Hargrove smirked, a cold, humorless grin. "A rule? I am the rule here. You walked into my courtroom with that, disrespecting the law, and now you dare demand a document." He banged the gavel again so hard that Mrs. Thompson, the clerk, stopped typing and looked up with concern. The crowd began to murmur. An older man in the back row shook his head, whispering to his neighbor, "That necklace over there's bigger. Why is no one saying anything?" James Wilson, the bailiff, stood near the bench, tilting his head to observe. He'd worked here 15 years, and Hargrove's focus on Karoline felt familiar. Not the first time he'd seen this bias. Karoline took a deep breath, knowing a direct argument wouldn't sway Hargrove. "She chose the long game, sir. If I've broken a rule, I have the right to a clear explanation," she said, her hand subtly adjusting her phone to ensure the recording didn't stop. Hargrove sneered clearly, taking her words as a challenge explanation. "Here's your explanation. I'm finding you $500 for contempt of court." He banged the gavel a third time, the sound ringing like a final verdict. The crowd gasped. Miss Thompson looked up, fingers pausing over the keys, her eyes uneasy. $500, a young woman whispered to her friend, just for across. The man in the "I Am King" t-shirt let out a small chuckle, but quickly silenced himself as Hargrove glared his way. "You'll pay today before you leave." A.R.G. Grove continued, his tone like a lecture. "Maybe this fine will teach you to respect order. This isn't a church, Miss Leavitt, nor a stage for your performance." He leaned back smug, as if he just won an unchallenged fight. Karoline stood still, her sharp eyes fixed on Hargrove. "Sir, I understand your ruling," she said, her voice even, but laced with resolve. "But I have the right to ask, why aren't the others in this room? With printed shirts, big necklaces fine too." R's face flushed, his hand gripping the gavel until his knuckles whitened. "Don't change the subject," he shouted. "You're the only one here bold enough to bring a religious symbol into my courtroom. That's the difference." Karoline nodded slightly, as if confirming her suspicions. She said no more, but her mind was clear. Hargrove wasn't just biased, he was targeting Christian faith deliberately. Mrs. Thompson resumed typing, but her fingers trembled. In her 12 years as Hargrove's clerk, she'd rarely seen him fined so harshly for something so trivial. James Wilson stood near the bench, arms crossed, his glance at Karoline carrying a hint of empathy. He'd watched Hargrove handle hundreds of cases, and this focus on the young woman stood apart. The crowd's whispers grew louder, some sneaking out phones despite the no filming rule. Karoline stood there, still holding her phone. Her mind racing, she knew this wasn't just a fine. It was a chance to expose something bigger. "Are you done, sir?" she asked, her voice soft but cutting. Hargrove frowned, caught off guard by her composure. "Not yet," he replied. "You'll pay, and I'll move on with the session. Sit down." Karoline didn't.